Willkommen in einem anderen Fragens video. Welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case part 10 of my Große Schlachten, formerly a Napoleon War series of example games or figure gaming rules, covering, in this case, card-based ad hoc scenario generation system, which is built into these rules. While the card-based scenario generation system is reasonably simple, without someone to show how it works, getting your head around the process can be a bit problematic. I'll attempt to improve my instructions on this point in the rules, but to assist others, I've decided to create a video describing how the process actually works. The bulk of the card-based system has not changed since I first used it about 2 years ago, but after significant playtesting, some minor points or rules have been altered. This includes removing unnecessary cards and complexity, basing each scenario force mix card around an actual historical battle, changing the weather effects, and tweaking the victory conditions. I don't expect any fundamental change in the future, as the system has been working well for at least the last 6 months. The only changes may be adding new force mix cards to cover different historical battles. Thus, in summary, this video is designed for the version 2.4 of the rules dated July 2023. While the main focus of this video is the card-based system, I do plan on coming back to my old historical scenarios to make them more viable. While historical scenarios do have their issues, many players do prefer to reproduce an actual historical conflict rather than create an ad hoc scenario. But that is for another day. Let's get back to our card-based ad hoc scenario generation system. The cards are contained in Part 2 Ad Hoc Scenario Card PDF file. Players will need to print the card sheets they decide to use and create their own cards. There are many ways of doing this, but I found using thick paper, perhaps GSM 200 or 300, and printing on both sides to be a reasonable solution. Alignment may be an issue, but you will nonetheless end up with usable cards, even if a bit of misalignment does exist on the rear of the card. I also cover the double-sided sheets or pieces of paper which I print with clear plastic contact to give it more thickness and to protect it, but using card holders also works as well. Each player needs a full set of special cards which totals 4 sheets shown here. The rear of each sheet will have the selected nationality sheet, in this case Austrian. You'll need to print these out per nationality, which has to be at least 2. I'll cover what each card means in more detail later. The next sheet to print out is the standard CNC cards. Each nationality has its own sheet in this case. And of course you'll also have to print on the rear the nationality indicators that you can see on the right here. Then a player will need to select a force mix card set, of which there are a large number based on actual historical battles. In this case, the Battle of Ulm. When all the required sheets are printed, each player needs 6 sheets of 9 cards each, which total 54 cards. This happens to be the size of a standard set of playing cards, or deck of playing cards. Both players should end up with a 54 card deck. If a player wants to try another historical battle, they only need to print a single sheet per player, assuming the nationalities are the same. If you're adding a new nationality, then you will have to print an entire full set of 54 cards. An option in the system is that players can randomly select a season using the region season cards shown here. However, most players will simply use the region and season printed on the force mix cards selected. As a result, these cards are not required, but may prove useful, possibly as an information card. Normally, I would not bother printing them unless you want to randomly select the season. There is also an information sheet which can also be printed, but this is not required to play a game, and until you decide this is something you want to use on a regular basis, I would not bother printing these cards. The sequence of play for creating each force mix and scenario details is detailed on these 2 cards, which both players should have in their 54 set card deck. I suspect I need more detail concerning many of these steps, which I'll add in the rules book, but the idea is once you are familiar with the process, all you need is these cards to quickly create your ad hoc scenario. The first step is to determine the region, which has an effect on weather and day length. There are two systems players can use. The easiest is to take the region from the selected force mix cards. In the case that we are showing here on the right is the Marengo card, which means that the battle will be played in the cold region. The other system is both players agree on a region, which will typically be cold nonetheless. Once a region is selected, the next step is to select the season. Once again, players can use the selected force mix cards to determine this. In this case, summer, as you can see on the right. If a random card-based system is used, you need the season cards. The card selection process for season is a legacy system which I rarely use these days, but I have to admit some of my opponents do prefer it. If the selected region is cold, a player takes out the 4 cold season cards, shuffle, and allow the other player to select a card, randomly. If the player who shuffled the cards likes this card, then that is the season they're going to be playing. Otherwise, that player then selects a card randomly, and that becomes the final season with no recourse. I find it easier just to use the options available on the force mix card. Where there is more than one choice, which is very rare, players randomly select one of the two options. Whatever system you actually use to determine the region or season, the cards do prove to have some useful information. The most important is game length. If it's summer in the cold region, the game length is 14 game turns. All reinforcements in these rules arrive in one of the 4 quarters of the game. Because 14 cannot be divided into 4 evenly, the reinforcements in Q2 and Q4 arrive over 2 game turns, with the owning player choosing the elements which arrive in each game turn. The only restriction in this case is that half of the elements arrive in game turn 4 if quarter 2 and half in game turn 5. Any fractions can arrive as the owning player sees fit. In some cases, the split is a quarter or 3/4 or vice versa. The cards clearly indicate this. Each player now selects a CNC card from his deck of 54 cards and places it face up on the table. In a standard game, a player can select any CNC they wish. However, there will be a victory point and card selection impact depending on the quality of the CNC selected. Some of my opponents preferred to select the historical commander for the battle, but this was never my initial intention when I created all these cards. I just wanted to add some bling. If Napoleon is selected, the player has selected a superior CNC, indicated by the /S. You can also have an ordinary or inferior commander-in-chief as well. If you do select a superior CNC, you suffer a VP penalty of 6 victory points. This means you better use your superior CNC in a manner as to do better than average on the playing area in order to achieve a draw, much less a win. There are benefits with this type of commander, but the bar set for victory is higher as a result. One benefit of selecting a CNC is that you can go through your 54 card deck and select any force mix card you may wish. This means one force mix card is not randomly selected and that player has more control over his initial forces. If you selected an inferior commander-in-chief, the opposing player can do the same. Thus, it's possible for a player to select 2 cards in this manner, assuming he selects a superior CNC and his opponent selects an inferior CNC. The information shown here is related to the game system, which is not really the topic of this video. This just simply lists the command radius, combat benefits, and ability to send orders, which has a number of other effects as well. The red text is related to the basing system used in these rules. Red is for the US basing system, which we'll only briefly discuss later. In most cases, it's assumed players are using the UK basing system, similar to the old WRG Napoleonic rules. Now each player needs to build the deck of cards that he will be randomly selecting cards from using his 54 card player deck, starting with, in this case, the special cards. These cards loosely represent each player's pre-battle plan. Only 9 cards will be selected, 1 card from each card set, numbered 1 to 9. This shows set 2, as you can see in the top left corner, the 2, which consists of 4 cards. Each player selects only one of these cards to put in his deck or game deck. As you can see, you cannot force march and conduct an ambush in a single game. The cards also favour attack or defence, which is something a player can only influence, can never be certain of, so make sure you select wisely. Thus, hoping to get an ambush has no impact if you end up being the attacking player. After selecting cards from set 1 to 8, we then moved to the weather cards, which is set 9. Players can only select a weather card from a valid region, so if cold, you cannot select a dust storm. If the region is cold, these are the cards a player can select from. Only 1 card is selected, and a player can select a card which has no effect in the current season if they so desire, thus avoiding any weather effects. In this case, rain can only impact you if the season is summer. The weather event in almost all cases is not certain. If you are an attacker, then this card can be used in Q1, certainly, and only impacts Q1, but in other quarters, the attacker must spin a 1 or to 3 in order to use the card. If defender, then rain can only occur in any quarter if a die roll of 1 or 2 is spun. Once a player has spun a dice for weather, that player can never spin again on another quarter for the same card. Well, they'll only have 1 card, so that's the only time they ever do it. If players do not like weather events, the weather cards can be ignored. When we enter this phase, players should have 9 special events cards in their game deck, or 8 if weather is ignored. Now we need to add the 9 force mix cards from the selected scenario. Each force mix card, as you would expect it, lists the forces within it, in this case 12 elements. Each card always has an ordinary sub-commander in it as well, which is not listed in this version of the card but will be listed in future versions of the card. Each card also lists the points value depending on when the card is used. If deployed on game turn 1, it has a value of 18 points. If it arrives in Q2 or the midpoint of the game, its value is 9 points. We will cover the card arrangement later in the video. For those interested, the force mix cards are all designed to give each player a total of 108 points, 12 by 9. This is to ensure both sides, within the variability of the element types, have an equal force to select from. This system is not designed to reproduce a specific historical battle. The historical battle TIELs are only used to give us a historically viable army list to work with. While each card is supposed to represent corps, each with corps commander, when I reproduce a smaller battle, such as Marengo or many of the battles in Spain, each card almost certainly represents something smaller, such as a division rather than a corps. Each player always has their CNC card face up on the playing area, so it's always disclosed. Now, in this step, if a player has a superior CNC, that player may select a force mix card of their choice, which we described briefly earlier. If a player has an inferior CNC, the opposing player may do the same. At this point, both players should have a game deck, which can range from a maximum of 18 cards to a minimum of 15 cards, depending if weather is selected and if any player has selected a superior or inferior CNC. This deck is now shuffled and each player selects a number of cards, which results in that player having 4 cards in hand, excluding the CNC card. These 4 cards include any cards pulled due to a superior or inferior CNC. This is done secretly. This shows a possible selection of 4 cards, 2 force mix cards and 2 special cards. As the maximum number of points is 34 points, the British player, in this case, must continue to pull cards according to the rules. The reason why the maximum is 34 is the British player can double one of his force mix cards. The final card is an objective card, which can allow the British to gain additional VPs. The British player in this case keeps on selecting cards until he has a points total of 48 points plus or minus 3 points. The plus or minus 3 points is in the rules only, and I need to add it to the card deck in the future to make it a little bit clearer. This will result in cards being rearranged during the card selection process as a player attempts to reach the desired point limit and desired plan. That is, he'll be moving cards from Q1 to Q3 to Q2 to whatever in order to ensure the points limit is 48 plus or minus 3. Let's look at a specific example. In this case, the British has 4 cards arriving on game turn 1, which totals 43 points. The third division is double because of a special effects card. The British player also has 2 cards arriving in Q4, which totals 6 points. Thus, the total British force mix is 49 points. This force is heavily weighted for attack, and the British player suffers a -1 VP penalty because he's exceeded his points total by 1. In the original version of the rules, I had a rather complex system for arranging the cards as you pull them. However, after many games, all a player needs to do is group the force mix cards by the quarter they enter and all special cards in a final pile. Some special cards need to be grouped with the force mix card. So the doubling card described earlier would be placed with the Q1 force mix cards. The objective card only has an impact at the end of the game, so would be placed in the special card pile. Players can conduct this process in whatever manner they prefer, remembering to keep the cards a secret and to arrange the force mix and related special effects cards into a maximum of 4 piles, 1 per quarter. Some of the special cards are disclosed before the game begins, including during the card pick process. This is because they impact the card pick, or if a special card is disclosed. Players use these cards whenever they wish, based on the state of the card pick and card arrangement. The next step is that both players now disclose their first quarter force mix cards and any associated special cards. For example, the British player, from our previous example, would disclose these cards, showing the opponent he has a points total of 43 points. On the opposing side, the French player total was 40 points, so the British is the attacking player and the French the defending player. In this case, this spoiled the French tactic, as they expected to be the attacker, and they made a number of errors during the game as a result. The ratio between each side's points total affects the deployment. In this case, the ratio between the attacker and defender is less than 1 1/4 to 1, so the defender can deploy anywhere on the playing area except within 6 base widths of the attacker's player's edge. The attacker can deploy anywhere within 2 base widths of the friendly player edge, or can arrive on game turn 1 on the friendly player edge. The deployment cards are in the original 54 player card deck and describe the 3 deployment options available. Now we come to the actual deployment. The attacking player places his force mix cards face down on the playing area, that is the force mix cards which will be arriving in Q1, in the 1/3 segment of his player edge he will be deploying or entering. Each playing edge is divided by 3, left, centre and right. Cards need to be clearly placed into one of these 3 segments. A player will also have a number of dummy cards equal in number to the force mix cards. When a card is doubled, use the doubling special effects card as the doubling force mix card. As a result, the British in this case will be placing 8 cards face down on the playing area, 4 of which represent actual cores. The defender now deploys forces. If there are hidden troops, the hidden markers are deployed instead. If ambush, nothing is deployed on the playing area and those forces are placed off the playing area. This should technically be a secret, but I have found it does not really matter and it's very hard to make it a secret. The threat there are ambushing forces is often a bigger impact than the actual ambush. Once the defender has deployed all Q1 forces on the playing area, the attacker now flips his cards and deploys his forces, either on the playing area or ready to enter the playing area. These forces can be deployed anywhere within the 1/3 segments the cards were placed into. Thus, if the playing area edge was 120 centimetres wide, each segment is 40 centimetres wide. The attacking player is the first player in all cases. Until they arrive, the reinforcement force mix cards always remain face down. They are a secret. Once they do arrive, even if over 2 game turns, these cards are flipped and shown to the opponent, and the forces then arrive. The flipping of the card occurs during the reinforcement phase, which means the attacker gets prior warning of the defender's reinforcements. At the end of the game, flip all the remaining cards and determine victory. Let's now look at the victory conditions in more detail, as this has a major impact on the game flow. There are always 3 standard objectives, and only the attacker gains VPs for taking and holding them. This is the standard playing area, and you will notice the objectives are progressively further from the attacking edge, making them progressively harder to take. The road and rivers also influence how difficult they are to take. It should be noted the defender selects the player edge. If an attacker takes an objective for the first time in the game, this results in 12 VPs for the attacker. The attacker can gain a maximum of 36 VPs in this manner. The objective only needs to be taken once, and if lost, the VPs are not removed, and if retaken, they do not gain any additional VPs. If an attacker holds an objective at the end of the game, a further 12 VPs per objective can be gained. It should be noted the last player game turn, or player turn, is the defender's player turn. So this is determined when the defender has completed the player turn. Often games can be decided on the last game turn with a lucky defender counterattack, or at least this has occurred in about a quarter of the games that I play. The attacker can gain a maximum of 36 VPs in this manner. If the attacker gains a maximum of 72 VPs, the attacker achieves a decisive victory, which is very unlikely. On the other hand, if the attacker fails to take or hold any objective and has less than 12 VPs, it's a defender's decisive victory. This is also highly unlikely. Using game theory, the attacker has to take 2 objectives and hold 1 at the end of the game to gain 36 VPs in order to achieve a draw. This is the standard result of most games. So let's look at other victory points. Eliminated elements provide the opponent with 1 VP. The type or quality of the element is not a factor. Each element equals 1 VP. In most games, losses will be similar, but not all games, and this is a viable method of achieving victory, particularly if the defender incorrectly deploys forces and leaves a weak sector that can be blown away. Now we have the special and secret objectives. Each player can have 1 of the 3 special objectives shown here, with the attacker benefiting from all 3 and the defender only from the 12 VP objective card on the extreme right. These cards are secret and only disclosed at the end of the game. If used, there are some restrictions related to flank attacks. The only issue with these cards is if a player makes a major effort to take this objective, a standard objective may not be gained or held. It's a trade-off. I've found they are only really useful if a player does reasonably well, thus moving a marginal victory to a substantive victory. They rarely convert a loss to a victory. There are also VPs gained or lost based on how many points the force mix of each player is. A player can exceed the points total by 3 points, which can result in a loss of 3 VPs. A player can also gain 3 VPs by only deploying 45 points of forces. The selected CNC will also have an impact. As you can see, selecting a superior CNC requires a player to do very well on the playing area, normally as the attacker. Selecting an inferior CNC gives the defending player significant force mix advantages. However, if you don't get the attack or defend choice you desire, you may need to start thinking outside of the box, or you'll find yourself in severe trouble. A number of the special cards also have an impact on VPs, all negative. Victory conditions will force you to do things which you would not otherwise do, and do make the game much more dynamic and fluid. I was never a big fan of objective-based victory conditions, but after many years of playtesting, it's the only way to avoid a boring game. Objectives force players to do something. Orders can also, but I find orders which force actions as a major negative in most game systems. Players do not like vague restrictions, as it's fertile ground for rules lawyers. The other factor which forces players to do something is a limited number of game turns. A typical game lasts for 12 game turns. So if you want to take enough objectives to at least avoid defeat, you need to move rapidly if the attacker. Even the defender can be impacted if they have to launch a counterattack at the end of the game to retake an objective. Any game turn an element is not doing something as the attacker, or counterattacker if the defender, is a drag on your chance to win. This does depend on the rules you use with the card system, as the card system is rules agnostic, however in principle. But if you want to complete a game in a day, then you can't move much beyond 12 game turns for your set of rules. Let's now drill down into the special cards in more detail. This may be a bit boring if you're already familiar with the cards, so you could skip this. Let's start with set 1 of the special cards. These are the flank reinforcement cards. They allow a player to arrive on the flank, or in a special case, even the rear. Each card allows one force mix card to arrive on a flank, or in the special case, rear. A quick note, your flank reinforcements cannot arrive on a flank which you have a special objective on. Thus, that card cannot be played and is thus wasted. The CNC quality also has an impact. If a player has a superior CNC, reinforcements can arrive anywhere on a flank. A rear flank reinforcement can only be used if you have a superior CNC and your opponent does not have a superior CNC. In all other cases, this card can never be used, but can act as a face-down dummy card if you so desire. If you have an ordinary CNC, you are restricted in where you can enter the flank. You cannot enter the flank closer than 1/3 the depth of the playing area to the player's or enemy player edge. As with the player's edge, the flank edges are divided into 3, a friendly, centre or enemy flank edge. Each is 1/3 in length of the entire length. So if the flank edge is 90 centimetres, each flank segment is 30 centimetres in length. An ordinary CNC can never use the rear flank card. If you have an inferior CNC, you are even further restricted in where you can enter. You can only enter the flank within 1/3 the depth of the flank edge, closest to the friendly player edge. An inferior CNC can never use the rear flank card. These cards must be deployed within the quarter they're going to be used before the game begins. They are placed with the force mix cards. The defender bonus gives a player a 1-column shift bonus in defence for the entire quarter, but at the risk of defending elements becoming exhausted. The card must be deployed within a quarter before the game begins, and is placed with the force mix cards in a specific quarter. Heroic defence can be used once at any point in the game and gives a defensive benefit which can range from 1 to 3 shift bonuses. Let's now move on to the set 2 cards. Masterful disengagement can be used once at any point in the game and allows up to 3 combats, or defenders associated with 3 combats, to disengage during the non-phasing combat phase within a single game turn. It's based on combats, so if 6 elements are being attacked in a single combat, all 6 elements can disengage, and that counts as 1 masterful disengagement. 2 more are possible within the same game turn. Once used, you cannot use it any further. The hidden troop card allows the player to place 24 hidden element markers on the playing area, half of which are dummies. Once an enemy is within 3 base widths, the marker is flipped. If not a dummy, the actual element replaces the counter. If your CNC is inferior, you cannot use this card. The card is used before the game begins. If not used, it has no effect and remains face down. If your CNC is inferior, you can also not use this card, although it can act as a dummy card face down, that is the ambush card. This card allows you to create an ambush with up to 6 elements. The ambush comes from any woods on the playing area. Once an enemy element moves within 2 base widths of any wood, the only player can spring the ambush, deploying 6 elements on the edge of the woods. The card is used at any time in the game, and if not used, remains face down. Incidentally, if a card, ambush, or hidden is not used, there is no VP impact. The VP impact is only applied if they're used. The Force March card allows a player to have up to 12 elements move faster than normal at the risk of exhaustion. This card must be deployed within a quarter before the game begins. This card is placed with the Force Mix cards within a specific quarter. Most likely the Force Mix cards that will be impacted by this card. We'll now move on to set 3. These contain the special objective cards, which we've already discussed. Moving on to the set 4 cards. These contain cards which impact cards being already selected. Dispose of any card allows you to get rid of an unwanted card and can be used at any time during the card selection process. If not used, it remains face down. The Select One Force Mix card from the deck allows a player to specifically select one Force Mix card from the deck. It can be used at any time during the card selection process. If not used, it remains face down. The Double One Force Mix card allows a player to double a Force Mix card. It's placed with the Force Mix card, it's doubling at any point during the card selection and arrangement process and remains with that card. Card set 5 and 6 contains only one card each, and if selected, one of your original sub-commanders, which is ordinary, becomes either superior or inferior depending on the card selected. This has a points cost value, and this varies based on when the card is used. It's basically a Force Mix card. Let's now move on to the set 7 cards. Heroic Attack can be used once at any point in the game and gives an attack advantage from 1 to 3 shifts, depending on the die roll. The Attacker bonus card gives a player a 1-column shift bonus for up to 3 attacks within an entire game turn for all the game turns within a quarter. There is a risk of attacking elements becoming exhausted. This card must be deployed within a quarter before the game begins. The card is placed with the Force Mix cards within a specific quarter normally. Incidentally, if there are no Force Mix cards arriving in the quarter you want to use this, then the card sits there by itself. The Flank Reinforcement cards allows a player to add a second Force Mix card to any flank attack. This card is placed with the Flank Attack card. If not used, it remains face down. The Fortification card allows a player to fortify up to 12 elements. It's only available for the defender and must be deployed at the start of the game or remains face down unused. Remembering, if you're not using the card, you don't pay the -2 VP penalty. We'll now move on to the set 8, which are the Intelligence cards. The Intelligence Success allows a player to view any one opposing face down card. This card can be played at any time before the game begins or remains face down. The Superior Reconnaissance cards allows a player to view any flank attack card in the opposing player's selected cards. This includes a Flank Reinforcement card. The Artillery can set a fire in a built-up area allows a player to set fire in a built-up area, forcing the enemy to flee. This can be very useful at the end of the game in order to take an objective. The last set is set 9, and these are the weather cards, which we've already discussed previously. The weather effects are clearly stated on the cards. The card system is rules agnostic, and players can modify them to suit any rules they so desire. Even if they are being used within the Große Schlachten rules, players can still add new cards or remove cards they're not happy with. The objective of these special cards is to reproduce a player's operational plan, which may or may not pan out as expected, and players can certainly modify those cards as they so desire. And so we come to an end of my part 10 of my Große Schlachten, formerly Napoleon at War series of videos, in this case covering the card-based ad hoc scenario generating system. Alle guten Dinge, kommen zu einem Ende.